Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters, friends. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the National Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. Hope all of you are doing well. Thank you for joining us for today's special Care on Air. As you all know, we usually do these episodes on Thursday, but we're doing it Friday today because this is May 19th, the anniversary of the assassination of Brother Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X. And so we wanted to mark this day with a few special guests and a discussion to remind ourselves of the legacy of Brother Malcolm and what we can take from that legacy as we all carry on today, so many years after he was taken from us. May Allah grant him the highest rank of paradise. With that, let me bring on our special guests for this discussion. We have, many of you have seen our dear friend before. Bring on Brother Amir Muhammad of the Islamic Heritage Museum. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Amir.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Edward.
Good to see you, my friend. And let's also bring on Dr. Amina McCloud of DePaul University.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Professor. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, but I got to remind you, I'm a retired professor.
Professor, once professor, always professor. We are not watering down your title at all. I'll call you the dean if I can. So, but no, alhamdulillah, it's good to have you back. So, Professor Emeritus, let me start with you, if I may. It's May 19th. Obviously, so many years after Brother Malcolm passed away. I think different people take different things from his legacy. We have some political leaders even who will embrace the parts of his legacy that are easy to embrace, but not the parts of his legacy that are a little harder to embrace. What are your thoughts on the things that you think we in America should be taking from Malcolm X's legacy all these years after he's gone? It could be we as Americans, as African Americans, as Muslims, or even people around the world. What do you think are the most important lessons we should be taking or thinking about today?
Well, I think that one of the parts of Brother Malcolm El-Hajj Malik Shabazz's legacy is definitely awareness of what's going on around us globally and next door to us and under our feet, and the stand for justice and the continual push to speak back to evil forces, bad judgments, some of the things that CARE does, as a matter of fact, and you do, kind of bring that legacy forward. And I think that is one of the hallmarks. I was just writing about him at Oxford Union, and to be able to negotiate rhetorically a crowd in Harlem and a crowd at Oxford Union is quite a feat. And I think he asked that of all of us, be able to talk to your next door neighbor and be able to talk when you need to those who think they wield the battalions of power.
Absolutely. Brother Amir, let me go to you. So good to have you, alhamdulillah. I think this is your first time on Care on Air, so we're very happy to have you with us, brother. So tell me your thoughts, the legacy of Malcolm X. What do you take from him all these years later? What do you think the community, the broader country, we should be taking from his legacy?
I think one of the things that we can take from Malcolm's legacy is he was a man of faith, a man of principles, a man of belief, and independent thinking. Malcolm, even though he was a link in a chain, he had a teacher, Elijah, and he had compatriots or companions that have taken on that light. Malcolm represents to many individuals all throughout the world. He's a American hero that represents the potential of all human beings to grow and to make a change and to become independent thinking or independent thinker and a person of faith and belief and principles.
I think that mention of faith is so important, Brother Amir. last year there was an article written about Malcolm X by, I think it was a very left-leaning newspaper. It's kind of a semi-communist publication, and they wrote an article praising him. But what I noticed about the article, they went through his history and all this stuff, but they didn't mention at all that he was a Muslim. Literally, they went through this whole article praising him for standing up against the capitalism and all this stuff, but they managed to avoid mentioning the fact that it was Islam more than anything else that motivated the change in his life and his fight for justice. And so this secularization of him, this creeping secularization I've noticed happening. So I'm glad you mentioned faith, because that was the most important thing to him, was the fact that he was a Muslim, and he thought that Islam had the solution for America, for the racism that we saw in America. Professor Aldine, let me bring it back to you. So, when we look at this holiday and the efforts to, we will be going to his gravesite to make dua and pray there. And we look at some of our American political leaders who also now even recognize him. How do you think the American perception of him has changed over the past 60 years, or not changed, like compared from when he passed away, public perception of him to now? What do you think has changed about him in terms of the perception?
Well, I think the biggest change has been the perception among Muslims themselves. Uh, Muslims didn't own Malcolm outright because he had left the nation. So they didn't own him. I mean, some did, of course, and immigrants definitely didn't own him because of what he said. But as time has worn on, and what he said has come to, I mean, it's mirrored everywhere. People are realizing, well, wait a minute, you know, is it that he spoke truth to power that upset me, made me nervous, made me think they were going to come after me in some way or the other? Oh, I just want to get along. But he had a hand in shaping what we call civil rights, and definitely the perception of him has changed. Now, with DeSantis and some others who are trying to wipe out our history, Malcolm was very fervent about don't let them destroy Black history. Um, it's going to be an interesting small war for us to wage.
Brother Amir, let me take it back to you. What are your thoughts on that? On the way, especially maybe Black America more broadly, even outside the Muslim community, and even in white America, the way Malcolm X is viewed. What are your thoughts on some of the changes that have occurred over the past 60 years or so?
I think the commercialization of Malcolm and the Nation of Islam story, because it is uniquely American story, but it's a story that carries love and hate. Where that I was shocked and appalled a few years ago in my travels that there was one young lady that spoke about Malcolm as Malcolm of the '60s, and how he talked and how she thought that he spoke hatred and things like that. She had a very old, obsolete perception of Malcolm. But for many people all throughout, they made a postal stamp of Malcolm. There's streets across the country with Malcolm X on it, Shabazz. Malcolm has become as American apple pie can be. Malcolm represents the duality that exists within America, but yet the love of America. There's no terrorist act or no terrorist threats or anything that they could accuse Malcolm of, or any of the followers of the nation, or of the followers of Malcolm. But he was yet productive people, energized people. And what has happened, what I've seen now is that Malcolm to the world has opened the doors for many Muslims that are in the government and politics today. But yet the people, the followers of the people of Malcolm, we seem to be fading out. Our legacy, our history, our contributions have starting to seem to be written out. But yet you hear quotes that people quote about Malcolm. Most recently, you heard them making a stand, when the politician making a stand that I forgot one of the other politicians was not speaking like Malcolm would speak, of independent thinking, independent thought, or not thinking or speaking like in an Uncle Tom mindset.
So, Professor, one of the things that I think is skipped over about Malcolm X is the impact he had during the civil rights movement, right? Even though he clearly had strong disagreements with some of the strategies pursued by the most well-known and popular Black civil rights leaders, he did get to the movement in his own way. And in fact, people forget he was in Selma at one point, almost acting as kind of a counterweight to what was happening there.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us about his role in the civil rights movement, his unique kind of role in the perspective that he brought, and how that somewhat could have impacted the movement, not the least because some people were scared of the alternative that he laid out compared to the easier way to resolve the situation. Can you tell us about that?
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, because you had one way, which was, and these are my own words, dependent on the largesse of white consciousness to give in to the demands of white folk. And Malcolm, on the other hand, was saying, they haven't shown you this largesse that you're looking for. And here I and others sit showing you what will happen if you don't consider what is being asked. And I thought that that was extremely important, and it kept resonating. By the time I went to college, it was resonating everywhere. That sitting in, laying down, letting dogs be put loose on you, and hoses was not the way. Nothing had changed, except we had further decimated the Black community with integration. Those notions were running around, and that we needed to be independent thinkers was the mark of the day. As Brother Amir is saying, this independent thinking, read, learn, analyze, was there.
So, Amir, let me bring it to you, this question. So, one of the things that Brother Malcolm said, even later in his life, when he softened his position towards Dr. King and the civil rights movement, was he still didn't think that the movement would ultimately succeed in conquering the problem of racism in America. Right? And I think there's an argument to be made that he turned out in hindsight to be wrong about what the civil rights movement could achieve, because there were legal strides that were made. There are many things that African Americans can accomplish and do in this country legally, that civil rights movement achieved. But we are still dealing with the problem of racism and all of its police brutality and all that. So the civil rights movement succeeded in many ways and did so much good for us, but the problem of racism still existed. And what he said was he thought Islam was the solution that can remove racism from the hearts of people. What are your thoughts, Amir, on what was left undone, and what do you think? There's no way to know for sure, but based on what he was doing at the end of his life, the Afro-American Organization of Unity, what do you think he would have pursued, had he lived longer, to address this issue of racism in society?
I think he would have pursued like the other leaders. If you look at Professor Azadine, who started the first Sunni Muslim community in the United States, Brother Wali Akram out of Cleveland, most Noble Drew Ali, most African American, Marcus Garvey, most African American people had an economic concept to improve upon our economic condition. And so Malcolm was reaching out to the African countries and the African continent to help to build relationships and trade. And he did see Islam as the door bringing about that peace. As Sister Amina spoke about, that Malcolm and Elijah, because they was both together, that they helped stimulate and made it easier for the American society to choose the path of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement versus the Nation of Islam. But the Nation of Islam and Malcolm, what they promoted was human rights. They didn't believe in that we need to push for civil rights. They believed in human rights. Islam, back those days, we believed in freedom, justice, and equality. Equality for all, justice for all, freedom for all. These are the same causes, the same problems that we face today. So yes, Islam is still that same door to help alleviate racism, bigotry, egotism, out of the isms that exist today. Pure Islam, not this Islam that the human beings carry about and want to project. But and Malcolm saw Islam in its purest sense, in its purest light, and this is where the cup that he drunk from. So Malcolm was bringing about, and you see, was a globalness, a global consciousness. And this is where I think that he would have worked towards, by moving towards a global one humanity, one society.
And one of the beautiful things I think. Go ahead, Professor.
I think both of you are just right on target. Uh, Edward with his question and Amir with his response. And I mean, that global picture is so important because you can see that you think that it's only happening to you in your little bubble. But when you see that things are being multiplied across the world, you get a little bit of a different perspective. I mean, it's not going to alleviate your pain, but it lets you know that you can find others to join you in the struggle.
One of the beautiful things I think, Brother Amir noticed that even though we can speculate what he would have done, but we do know that Allah is the best of planners, because that autobiography was finished before he passed away, because he had already delivered the letter from Mecca. He delivered the message that even though he was not with us, much of what I think he wanted us to do happened anyway. W.D. Muhammad came around and led the nation, members of the nation, to mainstream Islam, alhamdulillah, and they embraced that kind of universal thought of Islam. The American people ended up in many ways softening their position towards Muslims to some extent, right? To Black Muslims to some extent. And then the Black community as well. Many more African Americans would go on to embrace Islam in the years after he left, inspired by his autobiography. So even though he was taken, the message remained. And I think he was still, even in quote unquote death, as we think of it, was still able to accomplish so much. And his legacy was able to carry on and still does to this day, alhamdulillah. So let me, we're going to wrap up, inshallah, we're almost finished. So, but Amir, let me come back to you. Tell us about your organization, the work that you do, the Islamic History Museum, and the role it plays in trying to keep some of this history alive. And make sure to unmute yourself.
That's it. It's really to carry on that legacy. The Muslim, as I said earlier in the beginning, Malcolm is but a link in the chain. There was those that came before him, and there's those that came after him. And our story needs to be told. Our story needs to be captured. And so this is where, with our organization, we're here to try to capture and collect that information and display it, and to preserve it for our legacy and for our future, for those that will come after us. They can understand our story, because if we don't tell our story, who will? Somebody else will tell our story and tell it a different way. Just like if they've taken Malcolm and marketed Malcolm, they'll take our story and market it a different way. So it's best for us to tell our story, and this is what we believe that is important. And our story is an inclusive story. There's ugly parts in it, and there's beautiful parts. Muslims in America have been here since the 1300s. We helped discover America. We help. There's Muslims. There's towns called Mecca, Indiana, Muhammad, Illinois, Muhammad, Texas. Muslims have been in a part of American fabrics since our inception. So we're looking to tell that story, to capture that story in the best positive and motivating light.
And Professor Aline, your final thoughts as we mark this day, May 19th. Any thoughts you want to share as we close out?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you and CARE for doing the show. That in itself is important for all those who listen. I'm trying to get with Amir and his exhibit. I've been following him for decades, and as the exhibit grows and matures, I think people will benefit from listening to it. I'm directing the Black American Muslim Internationalism Project for the Abu Suleiman Center. And if you go on the website, themaidan.com, what you will see is an After Malcolm project, which is a virtual, I mean, it's a digital, like autobiographies of people um, as they move through, and we're capturing all of these things. I mean, the things that I think Malcolm would have had us done, both of us are doing with the resources that we have. And you, Edward, are joining us in many ways. And again, I thank you and Care for doing this short but very important program.
Alhamdulillah. And thank you both for joining us. May Allah grant us all reward for this, and grant our brother Malcolm the highest rank of paradise, and allow us to meet him there in the highest rank of paradise. What a joy! What a joy that would be to get to see him and in the best of places. So may Allah make it so. And thank you both for joining us. And inshallah, we look forward to having you back in the future. Hear more about the great work you're doing. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Barakallahu feek. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And thank you all for joining us for today's episode of Care on Air. Please just make a dua for Brother Malcolm and for this whole ummah to benefit from his example. As we just heard from our guests, one of the things they did was speak the truth as he understood it. And one of the beautiful things about him was that he had the humility to change. When he realized he was wrong about something and that the truth is something else, he would immediately embrace the truth, whether that was in prison when he was an atheist and saw the nation, thought that was true, and he embraced it wholeheartedly. And then when he realized that wasn't completely true, that all people are equal racially and that there's only one God, and that Islam was the truth proper, he embraced that wholeheartedly, and he spoke up for the truth of Islam, even at great risk to his life, even though that he knew that it put his life in danger. And he also spoke up for international racial unity, even though that too put him in danger. And so he was willing to speak the truth at great risk to his life, to his family's life. And yet we today as Muslims, I think many of us are afraid to speak the truth about things happening in our society, and no one's going to kill us. No one's going to physically harm us. But we ourselves are suffering from fear. We can't have that. If we believe in the legacy of Malcolm X and of Islam itself, then we should act with the knowledge that God is our best protector and that we have to fear no one except him and act accordingly, speak up for what is right and against what is wrong, and let the consequences be what they may. And we hope we will benefit from that legacy of Malcolm X in the years to come in this country. May Allah guide all of the American Muslim community aright and the entire country aright, and guide Malcolm X's legacy to be a benefit to our nation and people around the world for many years to come. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great weekend, inshallah. And again, make a dua for Brother Malcolm. And we'll see you for the next episode of Care on Air, inshallah. Until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.